Roshni Miss, good afternoon. කියන්නේ පටන් ගත්තට පස්සේ ඒ ක්ලවුඩ් එක වැඩි හින්දාද සෙනසුරාදා හින්දාද දන්නේ නැහැ නේ. ඔව්. ඉතින් අපේ ඔය ලෙක්චරර්ස්ලා ඉතින් Zoom account එක පාවිච්චි කරනවා දැන් නිතරම. ඔව්. join mute participate allow participate to rename themes ඒක මේක නැහැනේ. ඉතින් ඒක තේරෙනවා නම් අමිතස කියනවනේ නේ. මං චුට්ටක් තාන්සස් පිටි විශ්කින් අහන්නම්කෝ එහෙම එකක් මේ මුලි මේ මං චුට්ටක් බලන්නම් මිස් මම හෙට විතර කතා කරනවා මං දැන් ලෙක්චර් එකක ඉන්නේ. හරි. Okay. Okay, good afternoon. Today I'm going to talk about new concept, gross national happiness. I think you are very familiar gross national and gross domestic production, gross national production. But today I'm going to talk about gross national happiness. Then today topic, gross national happiness toward a new paradigm in economics.
National happiness towards a new paradigm in economics. Learning outcomes. Understand the concept of gross national happiness. Understand the dimensions of gross national happiness. GDP and its discontents. Gross domestic product, or GDP, was developed in the United States to manage the Great Depression and then the wartime economy. GDP is the total market value of the goods and services produced by a nation's economy during a specific period of time. It is simply a measure of how much money is exchanging hands, a measure of a country's output in a given year. It was never developed as a measure of social well-being or progress. Somehow, over the last 30 to 40 years, GDP has been seen as a measure of progress, although it was never developed for that purpose. If GDP was going up, then everything was fine in our society. Therefore, GDP has been guiding institutions and politics. We need to say, no. GDP is not a measure of progress. It is one measure of progress perhaps, but there's may other things that should be think about the progress of the society. Criticism 01. GDP is an average. So even if most people in a country are worse off from one year to the next, GDP may increase if a few people are doing very well. GDP fails to capture the distribution of wealth and income. It may thus fail to accurately represent the experience of most people in a country. Criticism 02. GDP is derived from prices. So when prices are not based on reality, when they are distorted, then the measures derived from them are also distorted. Criticism 03. GDP does not reflect what money is spent in society. Simply, the more money is spent, the higher the GDP. It does not reflect the ways of spending the money and the progress of the human well-being. Criticism 04. The more people are put in prison and the more prisons are built, the higher the GDP. The indicator grows as long as more money is spent, no matter what the money is used for in society. Criticism 05. GDP fails to capture the environmental and social externalities of economic growth. Criticism 06. GDP fails to capture, especially in developing nations, is when a lot is produced in a country but most of the profits go abroad. This difference is reflected in the disparity between GNP and GDP. GNP is the sum of the income of citizens of a country, whereas GDP is the sum of the output in the country. Gross national happiness, towards a new paradigm in economics. Learning outcomes. Understand the concept of gross national happiness. Understand the dimensions of gross national happiness. GDP and its discontents. Gross domestic product, or GDP, was developed in the United States to manage the Great Depression and then the wartime economy.
Okay, then gross domestic product, GDP. Then this first part, I try to talk about the GDP and it is discontent. Discontent means dissatisfaction or not the errors or the disadvantage of using GDP. Then GDP was developed in United States. Then the concept coming from United States. Why? The United States used GDP for the reasons of Great Depression. Great Depression ආර්ථිකයේ විශාල අවපාතයක් සිදුවීම නිසා ඒකට හේතුවක් විදිහට තමයි GDP එක ඉන්ට්‍රොඩියුස් කරලා දෙන්නේ. GDP managed the Great Depression and then the wartime economy. The other reason is the war.
GDP is the total market value of the goods and services produced by a nation's economy during a specific period of time.
I think it is very known thing, common thing. GDP means the total market value of goods and services produced by a country during a specific period of time. Most of the time, 1 year. Then within the year, the total market value of goods and services we are calling gross domestic product.
It is simply a measure of how much money is exchanging hands, a measure of a country's output in a given year. It was never developed as a measure of social well-being or progress.
Then it is explaining how money is exchanging. Then money exchange. GDP explain money exchange and measure of a country's output in a given year. Then money exchange as well as country's output, goods and services. Then the last statement say it was never developed as a measure of social well-being or progress. Then GDP doesn't talk about social well-being or progress. Then the important concept is social well-being.
Somehow, over the last 30 to 40 years, GDP has been seen as a measure of progress, although it was never developed for that purpose. If GDP was going up, then everything was fine in our society. Therefore, GDP has been guiding institutions and politics.
Then, within the last 2-3 decades, as a country in the world, all countries use GDP and GNP to measure their economics. Then Sri Lanka also use GDP and GNP as an economic measurement to show our strongness or strength. Then here say if GDP was going up, increase, GDP was increasing, then everything was fine in our society. Then if we can show big GDP, then it means our society or the human are good according to the economical mechanism of gross domestic product and gross national production. Therefore, GDP has been guiding institutions and
We
politics.
need to say, no. GDP is not a measure of progress.
Then GDP is not a measure of progress. It is very difficult to say GDP is measuring the progress.
It is one measure of progress perhaps, but there's may other things that should be think about the progress of the society.
Then GDP is one measurement. GDP is a one measurement. But there are many other things that we have to think about the progress of the society.
Criticism 01.
Then we will see what are the criticisms regarding gross domestic product or GDP. Then first one.
GDP is an average. So even if most people in a country are worse off from one year to the next, GDP may increase if a few people are doing very well. GDP fails to capture the distribution of wealth and income. It may thus fail to accurately represent the experience of most people in a country.
Then first criticism. Then GDP present the average, not the real picture of the people who are living in a country. Then collect all the people, all the sectors in money exchange and the food, good and services, then calculate as an average. Therefore, in one society, there may be a two type of people. One category is rich people, other category is poor people. Therefore, so even if most people in country are worse off from one year to the next, then worse people, poor people remaining in the country, but GDP may increase if a few people are doing very well. Then according to or considering few wealthy people, we can show good GDP. Then GDP failed to capture the distribution of wealth and income. That is one criticism. Why it presents the average? It may thus fail to accurately represent the experience of most people in a country. That is one criticism.
Criticism 02. GDP is derived from prices. So when prices are not based on reality, when they are distorted, then the measures derived from them are also distorted.
Then GDP is measured using prices. In the second argument, criticism based on the price, nature of the price. If it is not real price, reality, then the GDP may be a wrong one.
Criticism 03. GDP does not reflect what money is spent in society. Simply, the more money is spent, the higher the GDP. It does not reflect the ways of spending the money and the progress of the human well-being.
Then third criticism, explain the way of spending the money in the society. Then GDP doesn't reflect, show, how money is spending in the society. Then simply the more money is spent, the higher the GDP. But there is no way or there is no mechanism to show what are the ways the society is spending money. Sometimes we are spending money for unnecessary things. Then those are not directly linked with the effect to the people in the country. But GDP may be a big amount. It the last one, it does not reflect the way of spending the money and the progress of the human well-being. Then societies spend more money for different matters, ignoring human well-being. What will be happen according to the concept of GDP? Then this criticism can be identified or clearly understand from the criticism 4.
Criticism 04. The more people are put in prison and the more prisons are built, the higher the GDP. The indicator grows as long as more money is spent, no matter what the money is used for in society.
Then according to the criticism 4, more people are put in prisons. Hiredano, Godaka Hiretano. When people are going to prison, the government has to build the prison. Prisons හදන්න වෙනවා. එතකොට prisons හදන්න අපි ඉඩම් අරගෙන building ගහනවා. building ගහනකොට cost එකක් යනවා. building ගහනකොට cost එකක් යනවා. Then as a result of spending money for the building and other administrative matters, then the GDP price or the value of GDP is going to increase. But the reality of the society, more prisons. More prisons, high GDP. More prisons, high GDP. හිරකාරයෝ වැඩි, කුඩුකාරයෝ වැඩි. කුඩුකාරයෝ වෙනුවෙන් අපි හිතමු then we are spending several programs to recover or rehabilitate drug addicts. Then we are spending money, but it doesn't show the well-being of the society, well-being of the society.
Criticism 05. GDP fails to capture the environmental and social externalities of economic growth.
Then the concept of GDP doesn't address the environmental issues. For the example, consequences of an industrial and commercial activity which benefit for both parties without this being reflected in market price, such as a industrial activity or commercial activity, pollination of surrounding crops by bees kept for honey. Then sometimes some industrial activities destroying the environment, but destroying the environment, we can increase our GDP, our activities. We can increase the value of GDP, destroying the environment. I think recently there was, I think, one of state minister explained, when we are talking about development, we have to destroy the natural environment. That is their rationale. That is their policy. Sorry. For the example, I think recently we are talking about a very rare tree in our country. We are talking about that tree because of we are building a highway, highway path. The tree is in the highway path. Therefore, then government and some people try to destroy that tree for the purpose of building highway. Then spending money for highway leading to more value of the GDP. But when increasing GDP, there is no real sense about our natural environment. Then it is another criticism.
Criticism 06. GDP fails to capture, especially in developing nations, is when a lot is produced in a country but most of the profits go abroad.
Then it is clear then GDP present the goods and services within a year, the value of goods and services within a year. Then sometime more profit or sometimes some expenses, some parts are buying from outside the country. Then we have to spend money. Real remaining amount may be very small. Then GDP doesn't show the real picture of the national economy. However, then there is another concept, GNP, not the GDP, GNP. We use GNP to show the real picture or some extent real picture, not the perfect one, real picture of the country.
This difference is reflected in the disparity between GNP and GDP. GNP is the sum of the income of citizens of a country, whereas GDP is the sum of the output in the country.
Okay, then up to this point, I try to explain the concept of gross domestic product and the criticism or the disadvantage of using GDP to measure the real progress of a country. Then what are the alternatives? What are the other alternatives we have to think? Then the second part emphasize the alternatives.
Alternatives to GDP. If GDP is not an appropriate measure of well-being and progress, we need to review the following 02 questions when considering the well-being of the society. What do we care about as a society? What does well-being mean for us? We need to open a national dialogue that sheds light on what values are important to society, and then create metrics that reflect this and are used by decision makers. This dialogue is not an easy one to have, but it is definitely a fruitful one. Economists and statisticians often like GDP because it is relatively objective and easy to measure. Other measures in this objective arena are longevity, income, education, among others. A new area of scientific research that has emerged in recent years is the development of subjective measures of fear, trust, happiness, emotional resilience, and others. Subjective experiences cannot directly be measured using an instrument. Rather, these metrics rely on people's self-reports, and that's why statisticians and economists are often averse to them. Subjective well-being cannot be ignored by policymakers because it does impact objective measures like longevity. Subjective well-being is not just about smiling a lot. It's about spiritual well-being, about identity, about culture, about the environment. Bhutan has developed the Gross National Happiness (GNH) Index, and institutions and policies in the country revolve around maximizing GNH rather than GDP. Bhutan is a living example of a society that has openly engaged the issue of well-being and progress, and they have developed indicators, institutions, and policies to reflect this. alternatives to GDP. If GDP is not an appropriate measure of well-being and progress.
Then as you, I think, understand, now you understand, there are many weaknesses for gross GDP. Therefore, GDP or GNP is not an appropriate measure to measure the well-being and the progress of the well-being in the society of the people. Therefore, we need to review the following two questions.
We need to review the following 02 questions when considering the well-being of the society. What do we care about as a society? What does well-being mean for us?
Then the two questions are, what do we care about as a society? සමාජයක් විදියට අපි මොනා ගැනද care කරන්නේ? What do we care about as a society? Then the second one, what does well-being mean for us? How we pursue the concept of well-being. Then when we are going to develop an alternative method to measure the real well-being or the real development of a country, then we have to ask two questions. What do we care about as a society, and what does well-being mean for us?
We need to open a national dialogue that sheds light on what values are important to society, and then create metrics that reflect this and are used by decision makers. This dialogue is not an easy one to have, but it is definitely a fruitful one.
Then how we are going to introduce new method? Then when we are going to introduce new method, we have to open a national dialogue. ජාතික මට්ටමේ සංවාදයක් ඇති කරන්න වෙනවා. Then we have to open national dialogue and we have to ask what values are important to the society. Then considering the important values, then we can create metrics that reflect the values. Then using the metrics, then policymaker can make the decisions. Then last one say this dialogue is not an easy one to have, but it is definitely a fruitful one.
Economists and statisticians often like GDP because it is relatively objective and easy to measure. Other measures in this objective arena are longevity, income, education, among others.
Then according to the economics and the statistician, they like GDP. Why? It is subjective, not subjective. It is objective. It is measurable. It is relatively objective and easy to measure. Therefore, they like GDP concept rather than the other concept. Then other measures in this objective arena are longevity, income, education are the example. Then longevity means dirghayusha, the length of the age, income, education, those are measurable. Then what are the subjective measures?
A new area of scientific research that has emerged in recent years is the development of subjective measures of fear, trust, happiness, emotional resilience, and others.
Then nowadays, many scientific researchers introduce different mechanism to measure the subjective concept. Subjective concept measure කරන්න instrument හදනවා දැන්. මොනවාද subjective instrument? What are the subjective instrument measures? Then these measures going to measure fear, trust, happiness, then we can we have certain mechanism or instrument or questionnaire or method to assess the fear, trust, happiness, or the resilience, emotional resilience, and other subjective concept. However, measuring subjective concept is not easy and it is very difficult.
Subjective experiences cannot directly be measured using an instrument. Rather, these metrics rely on people's self-reports, and that's why statisticians and economists are often averse to them.
Then, when we are concerning the GDP, GNP, those are highly based on um, numbers, values. Therefore, we can easily measure and we can easily present. And the data has a reliability. eh? The data has reliable and valid in manner. However, when we are measuring fear, when we are measuring happiness, when we are measuring any other subjective concept, it is difficult to show. Then the way of measuring those subjective is self-report. Self-report. එක එක පුද්ගලයා වාර්තා කරන විදිහට තමයි අපට මේ වගේ concept මනින්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ. We have to measure the subjective concept based on self-report. Then when we are concerning self-report, it is difficult to justify. Justify කරන අමාරුයි. ඒ හින්දා තමයි statistician and economics ලා මේ ක්‍රමයට විරුද්ධ. ඒ කියන්නේ subjective measurement වලට විරුද්ධයි මේ කට්ටිය. මොකද ඒක prove කරන්නේ නැත්නම් ඒවායේ වළංගුතාවය, ඒවායේ විශ්වාසදායී භාවය අඩු මට්ටමක පවතින නිසා.
Subjective well-being cannot be ignored by policymakers because it does impact objective measures like longevity. Subjective well-being is not just about smiling a lot. It's about spiritual well-being, about identity, about culture, about the environment.
Then GDP, GNP is easy method or very clear method. Therefore, so far we are using GDP and GNP to measure the economy. However, then subjective well-being, how we ignore the subjective well-being? Because subjective well-being is important thing for the policymakers. Then we can show our GDP is very high, GNP is very high, but majority of the people may be suffering different things. For the example, we can say our health policy is okay, our health system are okay, but if there are more cancer patients, if there are more COVID patients, then how we say our well-being? That is a question. Therefore, subjective well-being we can't ignore, especially by the policymakers, because it does impact objective measures. For example, well-being affect to our life, well-being affect to our age, determine our age. For example, there are many cancer patients. Then cancer patients mean cancers mean our longevity remaining low amount, low level, low degree. Therefore, we have to concern the subjective well-being or well-being of the human when we are showing our economical strength through a mechanism. It may be GDP or GNP, whatever the method, we have to show our monetary values plus the well-being of human. Then the middle one say subjective well-being is not just about smiling a lot. Then we can find many people they are smiling, But behind the smiling, there may be many issues. Some people can live in with smile and hold in the issues, grievances. හිනා වෙවි හිටියට අභ්‍යන්තරයේ දැවෙන පුද්ගලයෝ ඉන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ හින්දා සබ්ජෙක්ටිව් වෙල්බීන් එක කියලා කියන්නේ මේ hina වෙන මිනිස්සු ගානින් අපට සබ්ජෙක්ටිව් වෙල්බීන් එක කියන්න බෑ. It is about spiritual well-being. මිනිහෙක් කටින් hina වෙනවට වඩා hina නොවී හිටියත් එයා ගාව spiritual well-being එකක් තියෙනවා නම් about identity එකක් තියෙනවා නම් about culture එක ගැන සෙන්ස් එකක් තියෙනවා නම් අපිට කල්චර් එකක් තියෙනවා නම් ඒ කල්චර් එකට ඇඩික්ට් වෙලා තියෙනවා නම් ඇඩියර් වෙලා තියෙනවා නම් අපේ එන්වයරන්මන්ට් එකේ සිටුේෂන් එක එන්වයරන්මන්ට් එකේ ස්ට්‍රොංග්නස් එක මේ වගේ දේවල් වල එකතුවක් තමයි well being කියලා කියන්නේ. Then well being is not a simple concept. It is not like a smiling a lot. It incorporates different angle like spiritual well-being, identity, culture, and the environment.
Bhutan has developed the Gross National Happiness (GNH) Index, and institutions and policies in the country revolve around maximizing GNH rather than GDP.
Then there is a example. There is a country developed new measurement to show the country's strongness, ignoring GDP and GNP. The example of the country is the Bhutan. Then Bhutan developed a new concept, not the new actually, a concept like the concept naming gross national happiness, GNH index. Then they use GNA, gross national happiness, revolving around maximizing, then they try to maximize GNH rather than GDP. They are not concerned GDP, they are concerning GNH. Then
Bhutan is a living example of a society that has openly engaged the issue of well-being and progress, and they have developed indicators, institutions, and policies to reflect this.
Then Bhutan is the living example of society. The society openly engage in issues of well-being. Then they address to the well-being and the progress of the well-being. They concern the progress of the well-being. Therefore, they develop different indicators, different organization, different policies, different system to develop the well-being, human well-being, to measure the human well-being, to develop the human well-being. Then Bhutan is living example of introducing new concept to measure the well-being of human.
Gross national happiness. The concept of gross national happiness (GNH) was first introduced in 1972 by the fourth King of Bhutan, Jigme Singye Wangchuck. The 1972 legal code, which dates from the unification of Bhutan, declared that, if the government cannot create happiness for its people, there is no purpose for the government to exist.
Then I think it is clear this concept was introduced at 1972. Then according to the 1972 legal code, they emphasize if the government cannot create happiness for its people, government cannot create happiness for its people, there is no purpose for the government to exist. රජයක් පැවතීමේ පරමාර්ථයක් නැති වෙනවා රජයට මිනිස්සුන්ගේ සතුට නිර්මාණය කරන්න බැරි නම්. If the government cannot create happiness for its people, there is no purpose for the government to exist.
Gross national happiness (GNH) measures the quality of a country in more holistic way than GNP, and believes that the beneficial development of human society takes place when material and spiritual development occurs side by side to complement and reinforce each other.
Then what is the GNH? Then gross national happiness is a holistic measurement, not like a GDP or GNP. Then GDP or GNP consider the monetary value of goods and services and money exchange. But GNH, gross national happiness, measure many items, many areas, many aspects of the society. That therefore it is a holistic way, and believe beneficial development of human society take place when material and spiritual development occurs. Then under this GNH concept, they concern material development as well as spiritual development. Then GNH or GNP or GDP concern the material thing only, but GNH happiness concern material as well as spiritual development.
The GNH index has 9 domains: psychological well-being, time use, community vitality, cultural diversity and resilience, health, education, ecological diversity and resilience, living standard, good governance.
Then this index has 9 domains, then cover the 9 domains to get a number. What are the 9 domains? Psychological well-being of the people. Minisunge psychological well-being. Then how people use the time use. Then community vitality. Javaya, community ke Javaya, vitality. Then cultural diversity and resilience. Health, එකත් බලනවා. Education, ecological diversity. පරිසරයේ තියෙන විවිධත්වය. Living standard, what is the level of living standard? And the last one, good governance. Then combining these 9 domain, 9 area, 9 dimensions, then they measure the gross national happiness. Then these 9 areas explain the people happiness. Then for the example, psychological well-being, it directly affect to the happiness. Time use directly affect to the happiness. Likewise, all these 9 domains directly help to determine the human happiness. Then we will see what are the sub-indicators of each domain.
Under psychological well-being, there are 4 indicators that are to be developed, which are life satisfaction, positive emotions, negative emotions, spirituality. Indicators of the health are mental health, self-reported health status, healthy day, disability. The indicators of the time use are work, sleep. Indicators of educations are literacy, schooling, knowledge, value. Indicators of cultural diversity and resilience are speak native language, cultural participation, artistic skills, Indicators of good governance are government performance, fundamental rights, services, political participation. Indicators of community vitality are donation, time and money, community relationship, family, safety. Indicators of ecological diversity and resilience are ecological issues, responsibility towards environment, wildlife damages, rural, urbanization issues. Indicators of living standards are assets, housing, household per capita income, vision.
Then I think you have idea what are the indicators, so what are the area they concern to measure the GNH. That is very lengthy and very holistic concept. Then they use lengthy document to evaluate or assess the people happiness.
Per
Okay.
capita income, vision of individual, society, and governing system.
Then we will review. We have to get idea about the individual, society, and governing system under the GNH.
GNH envisions a person to be bonded deeply to a safe and supportive community in which trustworthiness of the people are high, and fear of victimization by other human beings is ideally non-existent.
Then, according to this concept, GNH lead safe and supportive community. Safe and supportive community. Then they need to build safe and supportive community. Then within the safe and supportive community, the people have trustworthiness. There are big trustworthiness. Then this country try to develop safe and supportive community, society with trustworthiness. And they try to remove the fear, absence of fear of victimization by other human being. That is the concept, the vision of the GNH.
A person's psychological attributes begin with freeing her basic good nature, of kindness, generosity, forgiveness, contentment, and compassion, from repression by blinding negative emotions like anger, jealousy, and selfishness. This inner view of persons is the subject of psychological domain of GNH.
Then what is the personal vision or the individual uh, vision? Vision for the very below entity in the society, individual. Then this system try to develop uh, virtues or the values among the people. Here say attributes begin with basic good nature of kindness, generosity, forgiveness, contentment. Then this system try to develop good nature, good nature of human. How eradicating or minimizing the negative emotions like anger, jealousy, selfishness. Then you can get idea how GNH lead to develop human, or how the vision of GNH for the individual. මිනිස්සෙක් පුද්ගලයෙක් ගත්තොත් ඒ පුද්ගලයාට GNH එක තුල තියෙන්නේ happiness index එක තුල තියෙන්නේ මේ පුද්ගලයා happy වෙන්න නම් good qualities වැඩි කරන්න ඕන, bad qualities අඩු කරන්න ඕන. If you need to uh, develop a people with happy, then you have to develop good qualities within the human and eradicate the bad qualities.
The domains of good governance, living standards, health, and education in GNH articulate the familiar developmental perspectives. In the health domain, GNH envisions a person to have over 26 healthy days a month, have high self-reported health, and must not suffer from serious deprivations from disabilities.
Then what is the government vision? Then government has to concern about health, good governance, living standard, health, education under the GNH, happiness index. Then government has to concern good governance, living standard, health and education. Then especially here mentioned GNH envisions a person to have over 26 healthy days a month. මාස එකක් තුල healthy දින 26කට වැඩි විය යුතුයි කියලා පොලිසි එකක් තියෙනවා. නැත්නම් අයිඩියා එකක් මේ GNH එක තුල තියෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ දවස් 30ක් නම් දවස් 4යි ලෙඩ වෙන්න පුළුවන්. උණේ හෙම්බිරිසාව කැස්ස කොන්දේ අමාරු වගේ දේවල් දවස් 4යි තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. අඩුම තරමේ දවස් 26ක් ඒ පුද්ගලයා මානසික සහ ශාරීරිකව ෆිට්නස් එකක් තියෙනවා. Then this indicator emphasized at least you have to maintain strong mind and body within 26 days. That is very strong, very good criteria to measure the health of a people. Health of the people.
The education indicators are broadened to cultivate values against self-destructive and other destructive actions in mind, body, and speech.
Then when concerned the education sector, their education vision is very broad, not only teaching or developing skill. They try to cultivate values. They try to cultivate values. Then why they introduce values? They need to avoid self-destructive and other destructive actions from the human mind, body, and speech. Destructive, විනාශයන්, තමන් විනාශ වීම හෝ වෙනත් ක්‍රම වලින් විනාශ වීම අවම කරන්න අඩු කරන්න ඒකට විරුද්ධව තමයි මේ value system එකක් හදන්න උත්සාහ කරන්නේ. මේ විනාශ වෙන්නේ කොහොමද? Against self-destructive and other destructive actions in mind, body, and speech. මේ destructive ඇති වෙන්නේ කොහෙන්ද? Mind එකෙන්, body එකෙන්, speech එකෙන්. සිත, කය, වචනය කියන තුන් දොරෙන් තමයි මේ destructive ඇති වෙන්නේ. Therefore, they try to cultivate values against to self-destructive and other destructive actions.
These familiar domains are complemented by domains of environmental diversity, community vitality, cultural diversity, and time use. By including time as an independent element in GNH, a person envisioned in GNH society should have no time poverty, and should experience the joy of slowness.
Then what is the idea about environment diversity? Then they are highly concerned about environment, culture, and the time. Then environment, culture, time, those are leading to determine the human happiness. Then here explain by including time as independent element in GNH, a person envisaged in GNH society should have no time poverty. කාලේ දුප්පත් වෙන්න බෑ කියන එක කියනවා. කාලෙන් දුප්පත් වෙන්න බෑ කියලා කියනවා.
Every day, a person should enjoy the right to have ample time to socialize, to have active leisure, and to have wholesome sleep.
Then what is the time? Idea about time? Every day, a person should enjoy the right to have ample time to socialize. Then every day, person has to spend sufficient time to socialization, social gathering. That is important. And to have active leisure. විනෝද වෙන්න නැත්නම් නිදහසේ ඉන්න active leisure time එකක් තියෙනවා. Then last one, and to have wholesome sleep. සනීපදායක නිින්දක් තියෙන්න ඕන කියලා මේ GNH වලින් අවධාරණය කරනවා. Then GNH emphasize then person has to enjoy the certain time amount for the socialization and for getting active leisures and have some wholesome sleeping.
To realize this vision of society and individual attainments, the vision of the government is one that was stated long ago in 1729 Legal Code of Bhutan, Shitenzen Chogyal, reign 1755 to 1759. The purpose of the government is to provide happiness to its people.
Then you can imagine the duration of this idea. What is the idea? The purpose of the government is to provide happiness to its people. This idea was born in 1729. 1729. Then you can imagine the foundation of this concept. Okay. Then GNH lead vision for individual and the society and the government. In this section explain the vision of individual, society and the governing system under gross national happiness. Then gross national happiness lead to vision of the individual. What is the vision of the individual? Good human behavior. Then what is the vision of the society under the GNH? Supportive and trustworthy community. Then they try to build supportive and trustworthy community. Then what is the vision of government under GNH? Then the government has to then government has to practice development perspective, healthy people, value oriented education, environmental protection, time usage. Then government has big role to determine the people happiness under their several institutions and the policies or system or procedures.
If it cannot provide happiness, there is no reason for the government to exist. GNH as a state objective aims to provide enabling conditions for happiness, as it cannot directly provide happiness.
In this say, cannot provide happiness, there is no reason for government to exist. GNH as a state objective. GNH as a state objective, then GNH is the state objective, aim to provide enabling conditions for happiness. Happiness එකට අදාළ condition තමයි සපයන්නේ යන්නේ. GNH provide the condition for happiness as it cannot directly provide happiness. We can't, usually we can't directly provide happiness. Therefore, then government has to create infrastructure or the background surrounding to develop human happiness.
Alongside the objectives and values of GNH that shape agencies, the actors and the institutions both within the state and society manifest GNH in practice.
Then how to practice the GNH? Then agencies, actors and institutions. Those are the method used to implement gross national happiness concept.
Workers' happiness. Worker happiness is a construct developed based on the mental and physical experience at workplace. The construct features indicators that provide insights on workplace commitment and opportunities to improve the working conditions.
Then new concept, workers' happiness. What is the workers' happiness? It is a development based, it is a construct developed based on a mental and physical experience. Then worker happiness mean mental and physical experience at workplace. The construct features indicate that provide insight on workplace commitment, opportunity to improve the working conditions.
Worker happiness is aimed at instilling a duty of care for workers' welfare. Significant association has been observed between workplace happiness and overall life quality.
The aim of worker happiness is care for workers' welfare. Happiness means the duty of care for workers' welfare. Then there is a strong relationship between workplace happiness and overall life quality. If you are living with happy at the office, it means your life quality is high or your life maintain high quality lifestyle.
In a large diverse workforce, there may be numerous work-related factors affecting their happiness. Physical components such as good pay, benefits, and training opportunities will lead to a strong sense of happiness.
Then what are the factors affecting to happiness? Then according to this slide, uh, there are several material component, physical component. What are the physical material component? Good pay, other benefits, training opportunities, working conditions. Those things lead to sense of happiness, a strong sense of happiness.
However, often it is the unseen subjective components,
Then there are unseen subjective components for the workers' happiness.
such as the relationship with colleagues or supervisors, work-life balance and others that can provide additional insights on the workforce happiness.
What are the unseen subjective components? In the relationship with peers, subordinators, supervisors, then balance in work and work life and private life. And those are the unseen subjective component for employee work happiness.
For this reason, worker happiness is conceptualized and measured through a set of both tangible and intangible factors.
Then when we are going to conceptualize the workers' happiness, or when we are going to define the worker happiness, then we have to think about two sides. One is tangible factors and intangible factors. Then combination of tangible and intangible factors, we can define the workers' happiness.
There are 5 dimensions for worker happiness under the GNH, which are psychological well-being, health, time use, education, living standards.
Then, under the gross national happiness concept, they emphasize 5 areas, 5 indicators to measure the workers' happiness. What are the 5 indicators? Psychological well being, health, time use, education, and the last one, living standard.
Conclusion. GDP or GNP as the Western-oriented economic terminology, does not address the happiness of the people or employees.
Then it is clear GDP or GNP doesn't measure our happiness. Huh? they it doesn't it it hasn't capability to measure the people's happiness.
However, the GNH addresses the happiness of people or employees.
Then GNH highly based on measuring the happiness of people.
Workplace happiness is important to both organizations and individuals. Happiness Department.
Then what is the meaning of happiness department?
With the HR policies, now the organizations are talking about the implementation of new department, known as Happiness Department. The actual goal of the department is to analyze the happiness level of the employees and to set timely policies.
Then now you have idea about the happiness department. Then in the traditional way at the company, there are different traditional functions, the traditional division, HR division, marketing division, finance division, audit division, factory. Likewise, traditionally we divide different section. But in the world, there is a new trend about the happiness. Therefore, some companies introduce separate department as happiness department. What is the goal of the happiness department? To analyze the happiness level of the employee. Then first one, the company, the department, happiness department analyze the level of employees' happiness. And secondly, make certain policies how to upgrade, how to increase, how to develop happiness among the employee.
Bhutan is the first country to set Ministry of Happiness. In India, Madhya Pradesh is the first state to implement Happiness Department and Andhra Pradesh is the second state to form a Ministry of Happiness Department.
Then, as a country, when we are concerned in our cabinet portfolio, uh, the cabinet portfolio also the traditional one. uh, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Fisheries, Ministry of mm, Development, Road Development, Ministry of Economics. Those are traditional. Then you have the living example. In Bhutan, there is a minister, Minister of Happiness. uh, Minister of Happiness. Then you can think the gravity or the significant of the significant of the concept of happiness, how they perceive the significance of the concept of happiness. In addition to the Bhutan, there are two areas, two local governments in India practicing what? Happiness department in Madhya Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh. Both Pradesh or the uh, local areas, local government, they introduce happiness department. අපිට එහෙම එකක් මම හිතන විදිහට මේ මෑත කාලයකදී අපිට හිතා ගන්න බැරි වෙයි අපේ වගේ රටක.
At present, European and UK companies are making a new post as Chief Happiness Officer, CHO, whose duty is to measure the happiness level of the employees and set strategies.
Then, what is the revolution of the company? Then company also introducing Chief Happiness Officer, CHO. The new post, emerging new post within the organizational context because the workers' happiness is important. At present, Europe and UK companies are making a new post as Chief Happiness Officer, whose duty is to measure the happiness level of employee and set strategies. Okay, it is enough for today's session. However, then if you go through our LMS, then you can LMS. Yes, in the LMS, then there are 1, 2, 3 sessions, videos. No, no, yes, uh, videos. This is the video link. This is the another video link. In session 1 and Buddhist approach. Buddhism. Denom. Uh, then there is a review questions. Review questions කියලා questions තුනක් දාලා තියෙනවා. You have to answer these questions. However, there is no need to submit the answer. Then what are the issues of traditional or Western oriented economic concept with the sense of Buddhist philosophy? That is the first one. The second one, what are the principles of Buddhist economics? The third one, compare the traditional or Western oriented economic philosophy with Buddhist economic philosophy. Then the topic 4 is today's session, then assignment. Then there is assignment. The topic or the question is happy workforce can be developed through Buddhist economic philosophy. Explain. Then you have to define happy worker or happy workforce. Then you have to link with the Buddhist economic philosophy. Then I assume it is very difficult, but try to answer this question. Then you have to submit within 1 week, 23 to 2021. Then you can use assignment. Then you have to write the answer using computer on handwritten. Computer පාවිච්චි කරනවා නම් PDF කරලා ඒක එහෙමම upload කරන්න පුළුවන්. If you are using paper and pencil, then you have to write the answer. Then you have to get the photo and combine the PDF photo. Then you have to convert the photo into the PDF as a file. අපි හිතමු පින්තූර කොළ දෙකක් තියෙනවා නම් කොළ දෙක වෙන වෙනම ෆොටෝ කරලා ඒක තියෙනවා software මේ ෆෝන් එකට දාගන්න පුළුවන් ෆෝන් එකෙන් ඒක convert කරන්න පුළුවන් PDF file එකක් විදියට attach කියන්නේ පිටු දෙකම එන විදියට එහෙම පිටු දෙකම එන විදියට PDF කරලා ඒක මේකට upload කරන්න මම මේකත් පෙන්නන්නම් upload කරන්න පුළුවන් ඔයාලට ඔයාලගේ link එක හරහා මෙතන upload කරන්න facility එක දීලා තියෙනවා. ඒක deadline එක 23/2/2011 උත්තරයක් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. assignment එක විදියට මම මේ විදියට දෙන assignment වලට ලකුණු දීලා ඒව එකතු කරලා අවසානයේදී ලකුණු 40ක් හදලා විභාගෙට එකතු කරනවා. ඒ හින්දා මේකට link අදට මම හිතන්නේ ඉන්නේ ළමයි 20යි. ළමයි 50 ගාණක් ඉන්නවා. අනිත් ළමයිටත් මේ ඉන්ෆර්මේෂන් එක දෙන්න තව සතියක් තියෙනවා. මේකට මොකක් හරි උත්සාහ කරන්න මම 23 වෙනිදාන් පස්සේ උත්තරේ කියන්නම් කොහොමද ලියන්න ඕනි කියලා. try එකක් දීලා මොකක් හරි උත්තරයක් එවන්න try කරන්න. try එක තමයි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ කොහොමද ඔයාලා මේවා combine කරන්නේ think කරන්නේ කියන එක. මං හිතන විදිහට ගොඩක් අය සහභාගී වෙන්නේ නැහැ lectures වලට. මගේ එකට විතරද දන්නේ නැහැ. කොහොම වුණත් මේ අයට දැනුම් දෙන්න මේ assignment එක submit කරන්න කියලා. මොකද සමහරක් වෙලාවට ලකුණු 5ක් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්, ලකුණු 7ක් 8ක් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්, ලකුණු 2ක් 3ක් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. මම ඉස්සරහට දෙන assignment ගාන අනුව තමයි ලකුණු ප්‍රමාණය තීරණය වෙන්නේ. හින්දා අවස්ථාව අත්තර ගන්න එපා කියලා. then you have to inform others regarding the assignment because it is important. Sometime it may be big marks. If you ignore this one, then there is a big loss. Loss එකටනේ අපි වැඩියෙන් sense එකක් තියෙන්නේ. ඉඳා වැඩි sense එකට උත්සාහයක් දරන්න කියලා කියන්නේ. විශේෂයෙන්ම සභාපතියා දිනනවද දන්නේ නැහැ. සභාපතිටයි උපසභාපතිටයි ලේකම්ටයි ඉන්නවද?
ඉන්නවා
හරි. ඒ අය මේ කවුරු සභාපතිතුමා මේ පොඩ්ඩක් අනිත් අය දැනුවත් කරන්න. මම හිතන්නේ දැන් මොකක් හරි ඇතිනේ මේ මොකක් හරි ඔයාලගේ ක්‍රමවේදයක් ඇති කියලා හිතනවා ලින්ක් කරන්න WhatsApp හරි මොකක් හරි වයින් කියන්න කියලා ඉන්නවා. ඔය ගහක් ළඟ වාඩිලා හිටගෙන ඉන්නේ කමන්නේ. හරි ඕකේ. එහෙනම් අදට ඇති මම තියෙනවා මට ලබන සිකුරාදා උදේ වරුව බැරි වෙනවා අර මේ ඊස්ටර්න් යුනිවර්සිටි එකේ පොඩි මේ ප්‍රොෆෙසර්ෂිප් එක ඉවැලුවේෂන් එකක් තියෙනවා. මට හවස ගන්න පුළුවන් ද සෙෂන් එක හවස මොන හරි ඔයාලගේ දැන්ටම ෂෙඩියුල් කරලා තියෙනවද ඇක්ටිවිටි එකක්? පුළුගල්ල
හවසක මේ තියෙනවා 1-3
මොකද්ද තියෙන්නේ? සබ්ජෙක්ට් එක තියෙනවා.
human resource development tutorial එක.
ඒක කරනවද?
ඔව් සර්.
කවුද කරන්නේ?
ඒකට ඉන්නේ සර් කවුද අපේ මේ ඉශානි මිස් හරි පූජා මිස් හරි දෙන්නගේ එක්කනේ.
එතකොට ඔයාලා AGM එක ගත්තේ 3න් පස්සේද?
ඔව් සර්.
එහෙනම් මම 3ට ගන්න. මට උදේ වරුවේ එන්න වෙන්නේ නැහැ. මම මේ අර ඉවැලුවේෂන් පැනල් එකකින් හින්දා මේ මම එහෙනම් 3ට අනිත් සෙෂන් එක ගන්න. හරිනේ මේ සතියේ.
හරි සර්.
සර් මේ එදාට තියෙනවා අපිට සෙෂන් එක කවුන්සලින් එකේ.
මොනවාද? මොකද්ද තියෙන්නේ?
කවුන්සලින් සබ්ජෙක්ට් එකේ ප්‍රසන්ටේෂන් එක යන එදාට 3
ජාංගිනි මිස්ගේ.
ඔව් සර්.
එතකොට සතිය ඔයාලට නිවාඩු වෙලාවක් කියන්නේ ටයිම් ටේබල් එකේ? බ්‍රහස්පතින්දා
දවසම තියෙනවා සර්.
බ්‍රහස්පතින්ද පුළුවන් සර්.
නෑ බ්‍රහස්පතින්දා රවිනා දවසම තියෙනවා නේද? 8:12 compensation management 1:05 තියෙනවා work psychology and counseling.
බදාදා
3-5 නෑ සර්.
හිතුවා අමාරුයි. අපු සඳා
8:12 විතරයි තියෙන්නේ සර්.
සන්දේකට ගන්න පුළුවන් ඇඩිෂනල් එකක් නේ?
ඔව් සර්.
හරි. මම මේ ලඟ වෙනකොට මම මේ ඉන්ෆෝම් කරන්න.
හරි සර්.
හරි ඕකේ.